We talking rom-com, we talking action, we talking drama and movie classics. Whatever you want, yo, we have it. Cause we talking movies on the podcast. So I married a film critic. So I married a film critic. So I married a film critic. Hey honey, I just want to talk about the movie like casually. You don't have to bring up the cinematography. Honestly, let's just talk about like how the characters were fun. Married a film critic. So I married a film critic.
Welcome to So I Married a Film Critic. I'm your co-host, Julia.
And I'm her husband, Barry, the film critic.
Welcome, everyone. Today, we are going to talk about the 2016 film Silence. Martin Scorsese.
Martin Scorsese, one of our greatest living filmmakers. Yeah.
Yeah, babe, why don't you take it away? This was your pick on the list because it was your top pick for that year.
Yeah, I thought it was the best film of the year. There were a lot of great movies that came out that year to kind of refresh. Let's see. Nocturnal Animals, Tom Ford's crazy and brilliant thriller with Amy Adams came out that year. Terrence Malick's Knight of Cups also came out that year. A lot of, these are artsier films, obviously, but Silence for me, it was the last film I saw that year at the First Light Festival, which is like an extension of the Maui Film Festival. And it was a long drive home because it was late because, it's a long film and it started at like 8 o'clock. So I got home like, around midnight. And the questions this film gave me, the things I was thinking about, but we'll get into that. Silence, let's see. It takes place in Japan in the 17th century, so it's the early 1600s. We meet a priest by the name of Ferreira, played by Liam Neeson. He is witnessing Japanese converts to Christianity who are being tortured because this is a time in Japanese history when there were a group of hidden Christians who are being persecuted and murdered in public for their beliefs. And Ferreira was one of the Portuguese missionaries, Jesuit missionaries who were there trying to convert the masses. He had been discovered, and he's witnessing those who he helped convert being tortured. And then we cut to back in Portugal. Ciarán Hinds plays the head of the Jesuits, I guess the church or the head of the organization that oversees these missionaries, and he's telling Ferreira's the two young priests that he's been mentoring about what's happened to Ferreira, that he has been captured by the Japanese, and that there is a rumor that he has basically abandoned his faith.
Apostatized.
Thank you. He's apostatized. I say that a lot in this movie. The two young priests are played by Adam Driver and Andrew Garfield. Andrew Garfield playing Rodriguez and Adam Driver playing Francisco. And the two young priests are horrified that their mentor, Ferreira, played by Liam Neeson, has turned his back on God. How could this be? He is their mentor.
Well, and they're also wondering if he's disappeared. That was basically, they're like, he's gone. Maybe he died. We don't really know. Right,
exactly. They doubt the validity of this report. So it begins, almost like Heart of Darkness, where they've been sent just to basically find what happened to this guy. And inevitably, like Heart of Darkness, the deeper they go into the woods, into the jungle, they find some very raw and horrifying things. Our two priests have a guide by the name of Kichijiro who takes them into Japan. And immediately, once they arrive, they are immediately greeted by the hidden Christians. And the hidden Christians are telling them just about, the horrifying persecution that's going on. And our priests are finding themselves, useful and needed, even though they're being kept away and kept in secret in, living off the side of a mountain so that nobody knows they're there. So it becomes, without completely getting into the story, it becomes about how these two priests basically find meaning and use as they're overseeing services for those who are in need of them, but they're also wondering what happened to Ferreira. Is there any way to find him? And you're wondering too, because Liam Neeson is playing Ferreira, so you wonder if the character is ever going to reappear, or if this is like a one-scene cameo thing. And it is a mystery for most of the film as to where Ferreira ends up. And the film, I think, to its credit, it's a very unpredictable story. It doesn't really give you any indication. And by the way, this is a movie that doesn't hold your hand. It's a very grueling film.
Yeah, so when we decided to watch it the other night, you said it's 3 hours. And I said, okay, well, maybe we can watch it in 2 nights because I can't stay up for 3 hours at night anymore.
We're in our 40s. We're very, very old.
We have a 5-year-old.
We're not in our 20s anymore.
By the time she's in bed, it's like I got like 90 minutes tops.
Yeah. By the time we put our daughter to bed and walk the dog and the dishes are done, we're like
it's sad.
There's a lot of good movies. We're like, oh wait, 2 hours? No, we can't do it, man. 90 minutes?
Oh, like, do you have anything around under 90 minutes? That would be great.
Like, no, but I have a 3-hour Scorsese epic about Jesuit priests.
Sign me up.
How's that sound?
Yeah, so we put that on, and yeah, honestly, it's a little bit slow moving to get going, at the start, but I was not bored with this film at all. So for anybody who is even slightly curious, there will be spoilers, so maybe go watch it.
Yeah, we'll definitely, so forgive us. We got to talk about the spoilers if we're going to really get into it. But so if you're interested in seeing the film, please just stop now and come back after you listen to it.
It is worth a watch.
Yeah, you want to be surprised.
To go into it without any... I didn't even watch a trailer, which I love. I love watching movies. I asked Barry what it's about, and he gives me 1-sentence description, and then I go into it blind, and it's always a better experience than if I have seen the trailer and I know way more about it than I want to know.
I appreciate that, dear. And really, the best experiences I ever had with movies have always been that way, where I didn't know a lot. And I got to say, to this movie's credit, the trailer for it is very good. And I'd be happy to show it to you. It's very brief. But what's funny about it, it does give the impression that it's kind of an action movie.
Yeah, not an action movie.
They are trying to make it like, if you like The Last Samurai, and this is not that movie at all.
Samurai.
Our Lord said to them, "Go ye into the whole world and preach the gospel to every living creature."
Ferreira is lost to us. He renounced God in public and surrendered the faith.
That's not possible. Father Ferreira risked his life to spread our faith all over Japan.
It seems to me that our mission here is more urgent than ever. We must go find Father Ferreira.
This is in your hearts, then, both of you.
Yes.
Then I must trust God has put it down. The moment you set foot in that country, you step into high danger.
Just to talk about what you referred to, I mean, this movie does have some strikes against it, just on the surface. It is long. There's almost no music.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
So it's not a film.
Very quiet.
It doesn't tell you how you're supposed to feel about any of this stuff, which I think for a lot of people is like, I don't know how I feel, because movies with the music, they tend to give us a sense of tone and, what you're supposed to be feeling. This movie doesn't do that. And the violence, even though it's not, I don't think it's terribly explicit, but the violence is horrifying.
Yeah.
So it's hard to watch a movie with violence like this where there's no music to kind of cue you in like, is this good? It's just, there's an intimacy to this movie, to the characters, and to what we're witnessing.
Yeah, and we hear most of, the thoughts of the Andrew Garfield character, Rodriguez, when they finally land in Japan and Kichijiro is taking them, into this underground church, and they're basically hearing confessions, delivering sacraments, that kind of thing. If you're at all familiar with the Catholic Church, it's like that in an underground house, basically. And, the people there are so happy to see them. But really, it does feel like the priests are... It feels like the followers have way more faith than the priests throughout this whole movie. And I think that's one of the themes that Scorsese is talking about, potentially.
I agree. Definitely. Because this is, I mean, we're just talking about the first act of this movie. The first act is they're in Japan, they're in hiding. Oftentimes they hide in an underground panel in this little hut. It's on the side of a mountain, and they often avoid even going outside so they're not discovered.
Yeah,
So
all day they're underground, and then one day they decide to sit outside, and then they get spotted. Yeah, then you're like, oh no. So the whole time, you really don't know what's going to happen.
It is a quiet film, which really I think adds to the suspense. And I got to say, like, I agree with you. I don't think it's a boring film, although, you know me, I don't like to even use that word to describe movies, because I think with a film like this, the pacing, and it's not a fast-paced movie, but it's trying to evoke what it's like to live in this time where there's no electricity, there's no, extra noise. You're not going to hear a jet flying over. I mean, this is when life was quieter and slower, and I think the movie brilliantly sets that. And because it is Japan and there's a sense of mystery, there's a great deal of fog through most scenes.
Yeah, I mentioned that there's no, like, since we mentioned The Last Samurai, there's no, like, sweeping, helicopter shots of, like, lush green, valleys or anything like that. Like, we're basically down in the mud with these people, literally, so it does, and the color of the film is very sepia tones, browns and grays.
You mentioned that right after I think after the first night we watched it, and you were saying, hey, it's interesting, like, it's a really bleak film. It is. There's a lot of grays. I think it's a very beautiful film, but it's not beautiful in a Technicolor sort of way. If anything, it's evoking the, how dour and, how despairing this environment is. I feel like that adds to the suspense, and that the environment itself can't be trusted.
Yeah.
It's exotic, and it's an adjustment for our two priests, and it's also for us too, because we're like peering into the fog. Is like, do we see anybody? Like, is the danger there?
Yeah.
Because for a long time in the movie, the danger is alluded to. You don't see it. The opening scene with Liam Neeson, which involves Japanese Christians being tortured. I mean, they're having boiling water poured on them. I mean, it's horrifying.
It's really
really
awful.
truly awful. But otherwise, after that, there's a long period of this film where it is just a bit of, the priest in hiding, moving from one location to another. So you do get kind of, I don't want to say lulled, but you get used to the rhythm of the film. It is a slow film, and you're kind of taking it moment by moment. And as you indicated, back to your point, it's interesting that these priests they are not like of the same mind. The character played by Adam Driver, he has this sense of believing that we have to encourage them not to lose their faith at all costs. Whereas the Andrew Garfield character, they become aware that there is a process where this character called the Inquisitor, in a way, he enters the scene with his warriors, with his guards, and he basically confronts these Christians, forces them to stomp on this little plate having the image of Jesus. And if they do that, if they apostatize, then they'll be spared death.
They'll be basically set free.
Yes, and our two main characters become aware of this. And interestingly enough, after thinking about it, the Andrew Garfield character Rodriguez says, no, trample. Do it. I mean, he's basically saying, like, this is
like, it doesn't mean anything, so just save yourself.
And as not to jump too far ahead, but one of the main Japanese characters, who is the assistant to the Inquisitor, often says, look, it's just a formality, just do it. This whole thing of, like, look, just do it, it's going to spare your life. But to get into some of the deeper themes of this movie, I mean, it's very clear that the convertents, is that a word?
Converts,
thank you. Clearly not a word I use very, very often. The converts, thank you. The converts, I mean, they're living in poverty. They don't have much. Their faith is one of the only things that they have in their life. It's not a tangible thing, obviously, but it's a very important thing. So to be in front of their family and friends and to do this physical act of trampling and basically physically turning your back on Christ in front of other believers. I mean, it is it's everything for them to have their faith. So it's this provocative question of do you do it and just move on with life, or do you not do it and just show how deep your faith is and how strong your faith is, and it's a way of standing up.
And then get burned alive.
Exactly. Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I wanted to talk about Kichijiro because when we meet him, he says he's like, I'm not a Christian, and he nevertheless takes the priests to Japan.
When I saw you and Padre Carpe for the first time, I started to believe that God might take me back. Because in my dreams, the fire was no longer so bright.
You want me to hear your confession now?
Bless me, Padre. For I have sinned.
He is interesting because I liked him, and then I hated him, and then I liked him again.
I love this character. I mean, talk about literature. I mean, he's a little bit like the Ben Gunn character from Treasure Island, and he's also, not to get too far into it, but he's very much the Judas Iscariot of this story.
Yeah.
We learn his backstory, which is horrifying and tragic. We learn that he's had many encounters with the Inquisitor. He's had many instances where he's just, tramples on the plate of Christ.
Apostatizes,
runs off, and then they eventually find him, and he just goes through it again because he's just like, screw it. What else can you take from me?
Well, his family, so his family was all killed
in a terrible, horrible way in front of him.
In front of him.
Awful.
So he is a Christian, but he basically is like, I will trample to save my life, and then every time he sees the priest, he confesses. So it's this annoying situation where you're like, okay, well, he's not a believer, but wait, he is a believer, because every time he sees Rodriguez, and it seems like he just keeps following him, betraying him, following him, he asks to confess, and Rodriguez, he hears his confession every time, and every time he gets more and more annoyed.
For a lot of audience members who are not Christians or Catholics or not of the faith at all, a lot of this will be difficult to deal with because it is so much about the internal and how you express the internal. I feel that Kichijiro, for a lot of audience members, including this one, is the audience surrogate because on the one hand, even, obviously I admire the drama of somebody having to express their faith to the point of death. But there's also a part of me that's going, just do it. Don't die in this horrible, awful, disgraceful, embarrassing way. Just do it. You know how you feel on the inside, But the movie obviously is making a case for both of these sort of actions. And I'll say quickly, like I've told you, Jules, I don't feel like this is a movie that it doesn't celebrate faith. It explores it in really complex ways.
And I don't think it's advocating that either group is right or wrong.
Yeah.
It basically lets you feel so many different ways about everybody, because on one hand there's that admiration and I would hope there's something in my life that I would cling to like that to be able to die for. So you're really admiring these people, and just so that our audience knows, they're burned to death, drowned, hung on crosses in the ocean to drown, tied up, hung upside down, just to be left hanging upside down with their head in a hole. So honestly, the ways that they're tortured are horrendous. And so you think about that and you're like, well, I don't blame anybody for being just kidding, I can't do this anymore. But then at the same time, you admire the ones that really do they're like, this is my fate and I will sing this hymn until I die. And that's their way of expressing their love for God and their faith that they care so much about. And then there's the Kichijiro, who he has faith, but he in some ways he's just like, it's a big like up yours to the Japanese government, because they're going around all these like really poverty stricken communities when they don't have to. They literally could leave them alone, and these people would live their lives in fishing villages and literally do no harm to anybody. But they have to like wield their power and, say, no, Buddhism is the only way to go and you will only do that. If they never like went to visit these people, they would just live in peace and it would be fine. But they just can't, for whatever reason. They have to torture them. And so Kichijiro is kind of like, I'm not going to let you do that to me. Like, I have my faith and I'm just going to like give you the big F you and run off and keep doing what I'm doing. So I kind of see him like that.
I love this character. I mean, this movie is humorless. I don't mean that as a criticism, but this movie doesn't have a sense of humor.
No.
Kichijiro is as close to comic relief as this movie comes, and it's not close enough. But at the same time, again, like I find him the most relatable character. And I love his, because you're right. I mean, it is a big kind of up your stance. But the thing is, he even though he is at one point the villain of the film, because he does commit an act of betrayal that is akin to Judas Iscariot. But at the same time, if anything, I mean, his faith in this movie is the most unshakable, even though he doesn't, it's one of these things on the inside, he never falters. On the outside, he is always, he's always insecure. He is always flip-flopping. He's always wishy-washy about it. I don't know. I find that more relatable in many ways than even the main protagonist, because Rodriguez is played by Garfield. At times, I mean, he's frustrating because he makes it very clear, again, like in the first act of the movie, he's saying like, look, just trample on it. Don't, just do it. This is not something to die for. To live and to spread the word of Christ and to, to live in faith and to keep living. That's what we should be gaining from this. But over time, in the second act, Rodriguez is arrested. And it becomes clear that the Inquisitor and his warriors are basically, they're killing lots of people just so that they can get this priest to, apostatize himself. Also get him to turn his back, publicly. And they're making a statement about, the futility of Christianity in Japan. And it becomes a very stubborn act on Rodriguez's part. I find that he prays against it. He suffers through watching so many believers die. And clearly the Inquisitor and those in his ilk are frustrated and angry with him because, like, look, just like, not only do we want you to turn so that we can make an example of you, but we're killing all these people that we don't have to. That's kind of one of the things that they're... Yeah,
they basically manipulate him. Yes. And they're like, it's your fault these people are dying. If you would just apostatize, they wouldn't have to be killed. And you don't have to have their blood on your hands, which is like, well, sorry, but you're actually killing them and you don't have to kill them. You could just let them go live in peace and believe whatever they want to believe. But they kind of figured out that, let's just like kill the head of this thing instead of, it's like basically kill the shepherd instead of the sheep.
Yeah, I love these villains. I really do, because there's no yelling on their part. It's not mustache twirling villainy. They don't act the way you're used to seeing villains in the movie. On the one hand, you could be very politically correct and go, well, these aren't really like negative Japanese stereotypes, which we're used to, from decades and decades of cinema. On the other hand, I find these characters, their argument against Christian Jesuit missionaries to be very provocative. Not in the sense that I agree with them, but in the sense of like, that's an interesting argument. They use the very poetic metaphor that that they're trying to create, that the Jesuit priests are trying to grow a plant that can't be grown in this country. Later, it's made a metaphor about Christianity in Japan is like a barren woman trying to give birth. there's a take on it that's really interesting. They're saying that we've looked into it, we've read your Bible, and we don't think this adds up to what our people believe. There's problems with the translations. There's all these interesting arguments, some of them very practical, as well as, obviously being about just keeping outside Western influences from intruding upon Buddhism. And this is not something you'd expect from a film like this, or really any movie, because this isn't a film, for one thing, this movie isn't trying to proselytize. This movie is not one of those films that is pushing religion or religious beliefs on you. It's just showing how, for one thing, the compatibility or the incompatibility of two different thoughts, and also that, like any great Scorsese movie, the main characters are unreliable protagonists, specifically Rodriguez.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, his pacifism is admirable, his unshakable faith is admirable until it isn't. Mm-hmm. And he, as you noted early in the movie, there's a touch of madness to him. There is an arrogance to him that is noted.
The Portuguese language was a gift of your father Cabral. I've been asked to interpret on your behalf. There was concern that we might miss certain subtleties in your testimony if you were told to speak only in Japanese.
The testimony,
We wanted to be fair, and we do have a better grasp of your language than you do of ours. Father Cabral never managed much more than arigataya. All the time he lived here, he taught, but would not learn. He despised our language, our food, our customs.
I'm not like him. I'm not like Cabral.
Really?
Yes.
We have our own religion, Padre. Pity you did not notice it.
Oh, no. We just think a different way.
True. You believe our Buddhas are only men. Just human beings.
Even a Buddha dies. Like all men. He is not
You
the
are
creator.
ignorant. Padre, only a Christian would see Buddha simply as man. Our Buddha is a being which man can become. Something greater than himself, if he can overcome all his illusions. But you cling to your illusions and call them faith.
No, you don't understand. If any man follows God's commandments, then he can live a peaceful and joyous life.
I do understand. Padre, it is perfectly simple. Korobu. Have you heard that word? Korobu. It means fall down, surrender, give up the faith, apostatize, as you say. They tortured Fathers Poro and Casoro over the pit. Have you heard of them? There was one called Pedro too, and Ferreira, of course.
Ferrer?
Did you know him?
There are times when he comes across more as a villain in his arrogance and the way he speaks with the Inquisitor. There is a key moment in the early in the movie, right before he's captured, where he's looking into a reflection in a pond and he sees the reflection of Jesus on top of his own. There's a lot of ways to unbag that imagery. And over the course of the story, it becomes very obvious, to me at least, that this story in its way is a retelling of the last days of Jesus. We have a Judas Iscariot figure, we have a Christ figure who suffers. In some ways you would say he dies, and then in the end he rises again, although I'm getting ahead of myself. A character who is tortured in various ways. It's a story of political oppression as well as maintaining one's faith under such pain, physical and psychological. And, let me just remind you, this is the guy, the last film Scorsese directed was The Wolf of Wall Street, and before that, Shutter Island. And he made The Irishman after this. It astonishes me that this filmmaker can make movies of this caliber this late in his career, and that it's nothing like his prior movie, except if you consider that he has always made movies about the wages of sin, All of his films deal with, the consequences of our actions. His movies, even though many of them are very violent, they have never glamorized violence. They're always about the cause and effect of violence, the hurtfulness. In all of his movies, certainly his gangster movies, and certainly this one, it hurts to watch the violence in this movie. It's the way violence really should be. The philosophical idea of violence in a movie. You should wince. You shouldn't be like, yeah, that was a sweet kill. You shouldn't. You shouldn't be like that in any film. When someone is hurt or stabbed or shot, or in this case,
what about the Expendables?
Well, that's a problem. I'm not saying that violence can't be exciting. Obviously, it can, and when it's used properly as a tool for whatever reason, I think obviously there's filmmakers like John Woo and Paul Verhoeven who make violence very exciting, but certainly in a film like this and every Scorsese film, violence hurts, and it should hurt to watch.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're basically watching horrible acts being done to people who don't deserve death, and I think the one that was the most memorable for me that I keep thinking about are these old men tied to crosses, like basically in the ocean, and when the tide comes up, the waves are just slapping them in the face. And it said that it took one guy like 4 days to die, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it was just so awful, and to think that actually happened to people, because this is a true story, based on a true story, right?
It's based on true history. I mean, it's to get into it, it's based on the novel by Shusaku Endo. It was written in 1966. Endo is interesting. He was a Japanese Roman Catholic, which is not something you hear very often. I honestly have not read the novel. I know a number of people who have. In fact, I saw this film with a priest. He actually sat next to me. He had read the book, and he said that other than the last image of the film, which we'll talk about at some point, other than that's a Scorsese touch. Otherwise, it's a very faithful adaptation, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, that moment is, not only is it painful to watch, and it's interesting because it's a crucifixion scene, and even though these individuals are tied to crosses and not nailed to crosses, somehow it doesn't make it any better.
It doesn't.
And as I told you, I know Industrial Light and Magic did some of the special effects for this movie. I don't know how the heck they did that, because the camera at one point is in the ocean watching these guys. We're right in their faces as the waves are slapping them.
Yeah.
I don't know how they pulled it off. I don't want to know, by the way. Please don't send letters. I don't know. I mean, I forgive.
Unless you actually worked on this film, and then please send a letter.
Yeah, please, if you worked on the movie. But no, I mean, not to, I don't mean to talk about the magic of special effects. Talking about a scene like this, but I mean, I was just astonished. Like, how the heck did they stage this? Where did they put the camera? Is this even on location? Was this in a water tank? The filmmaking is incredible. I find that's consistent for the whole film. The way we first see the Inquisitor, where he's emerging out of fog, there are so many extraordinary shots in this movie.
Yeah, agreed. I don't know where else do we
want to go? Well,
yeah,
I mean,
there's so many things.
Well, this is, again, spoiler territory, and I don't want to spoil this for anyone who hasn't seen it. Hopefully, if you're listening to this, you've seen the film and you're trying to unpack it the way we are. The third act of the film, again, which I'll get into spoilers, no more spoiler warnings after this. At the end of the film, they do find Ferreira, and indeed, he has apostatized. Indeed, he's
married. He has a kid.
He's married. He has a child. He's turned his back to God. He's shaved. He looks. I mean, it's Liam Neeson with his hair back in a ponytail, looking exactly like he does in The Phantom Menace, which is wild, I gotta say. And by the way, just for a little context, this is Neeson knee-deep into his Taken phase. I love that he's in this movie, because this reminds me what a badass dramatic actor he used to be. With all due respect, I love Liam Neeson, but, I mean, you talk about The Expendables. He's been making too many of those kinds of movies lately. Again, I love him, but, this guy played Oscar Schindler and Rob Roy and Michael Collins, that's how I've known him. So to see him in this movie giving a knock it out of the ballpark dramatic performance was so great. Just this is the Liam Neeson I grew up with.
Yeah, and it's the voice. It's the voice for me, because he just has a great voice.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's wonderful in this. And when he reemerges to Rodriguez and basically, confirms everything that Rodriguez has feared and so much more, and makes a really wild argument why Christianity would not work in Japan. And he talks about how the Japanese Christians talk about the Son of God, and they believe it to be the literal sun in the sky, and that there's a miscommunication, so therefore it's invalid. It's great. It's great drama. I mean.
That's
because it's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking because you can just see Rodriguez like, oh my gosh, this is my worst fear coming true, and they're sitting in this monastery temple. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, Buddhist temple.
Yeah, and there's other people sitting with them, like monitoring this,
guiding the conversation. Yeah,
and basically, Ferreira is a prisoner there, right? I mean, they basically gave him a wife and a kid. Which
he inherited because the guy died, so he inherited his wife, he inherited a new name.
He gets a new name. He basically becomes this guy.
Yeah.
And he sits in this monastery all day and writes, science books? I mean, he's, because I asked you, why don't they just leave Japan after this? Like, why don't they just go, okay, you don't want us here, I'm going to go back to Portugal. But you said, no, this is their prison. This is their punishment.
Yeah, and it's a great example to have these two here. It's like, look, this is what we do. This is why your philosophy doesn't work. This is what will happen to you if you continue.
They make you a slave, and you will have to become like they basically like force them to convert.
And their captors, in a way, the Inquisitor and those who work for him, they're so even-handed about all this. It's not just that the characters are Japanese and have an elegance and humility to the way they speak. That's obviously historical and cultural, but it's also just like, I love it because they don't come across as villains as much as like this is the political decision we've made, and either you're going to adhere to it or there's going to be problems. And they talk about it in that kind of even-handed way, which is not something you expect.
But isn't that like just even more insidious in a way? Because we're used to living in a country where you can believe whatever you want to believe and do whatever you want to do, and here these guys come along and they're like, I'm sorry, you may not believe this, or we will kill you. And that's just because here's our 5-point essay on why, and now your choice is either converting or death. Okay, now you've chose to convert, so you now have this new name. Here's your wife, here's your child, and this is what you're going to be studying and writing about now. It's like, now we have control of your entire life. And it's like, well, that's not okay.
I'm not saying it's okay. I think the temptation was obviously there to paint villains and heroes in this movie, and the movie mostly avoids that.
Right, but I'm just saying, just because that they come off as elegant and even-handed doesn't mean they're not villains. I think it's just a more interesting villain.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Because I still was like, oh man, these guys are good.
They're intelligent, they're thorough, they're consistent. I do love that about them. To get to the third act of the film, indeed, Rodriguez finally, painfully, agonizingly does apostatize because he realizes it could save lives that are literally in front of him and just on the verge of dying in the most painful, horrible way. And it's, and he has Ferreira standing next to him, basically coaxing him, talking him into doing it. And it's, the film is done in the sequence is done in slow motion to see his literal fall from faith, fall from grace.
Because he's watching people being hung upside down,
right.
And to extend their death so the blood just doesn't like rush into their head. Ferreira showed him the scar behind his ear where they like cut, and then he's like, you just feel the blood coming out, going onto your hair and dripping into the dirt, drip by drip. It's like this most painful torture, I guess, you can go through. And so Rodriguez is watching this, and Ferreira is like, he's almost like like Satan in the desert.
Yes, and I think that's intentional.
Tempting Jesus. Like it does have that feel to it.
It absolutely does. And the casting is not accidental too. I mean, Liam Neeson towers over everyone in this movie. He's a big guy, so even his posturing suggests exactly what you're talking about. He's often, if not always, in a black kimono in this film. Yeah. So I think absolutely right. I think there's something very intentional about that. We should talk about the title of the film is referring to the silence that you experience when God doesn't speak to you, when God doesn't answer your prayers.
When you don't feel him.
When you don't feel the presence of God, when you feel alone. So the film is, and the film is open about this, the term silence and being in silent or being in silence comes up a lot. But interestingly enough, God as a presence, God as a real entity never shows up until one scene. Mm-hmm. And it's the scene where Rodriguez does apostatize, where he's looking at the image of Jesus in the plate that's been presented to him that he needs to trample on. And suddenly we hear a bit of dialogue, and it's clearly meant to be the words of Jesus spoken in English. I think it's Ciarán Hinds, the actor who plays the head of the Jesuit monastery that sends him. I think that's the actor who's doing the voice, I think. But my point being is that because it's Scorsese and because he's not, literalizing anything or laying it all out, and he's presenting it not only with ambiguity but also with the elegance of uncertainty, it could very well be that we're hearing the madness within Rodriguez. This is what he is hearing. It's not saying like this is a miracle, this is a real, true religious moment. It could just be that this is the final moment where he's breaking down.
I'm breaking down. I can't handle this anymore. Yeah. And I'm hoping this is what God would say to me right now.
Which is great. And I suspect, I suspect people in the faith community seeing this film will not like that kind of, it doesn't. There's nothing simple about this movie, about its journey or the character's journey. So I suspect that moment especially will be very painful because it's like everything in this movie. It's very messy and sloppy in terms of the character motivations and this impossible decision, this impossible thing that it's a catch-22 all around.
Yeah, because I was thinking, if it was Rodriguez with the choice of apostatize or you die, I think he fully would have been like, okay, kill me. I think he would have let himself be a martyr. But because it was apostatize or these people die, he was left.
I think it's like the lives of 5 people, right?
Yeah, it was about 5 people. And he had already seen one person get their head chopped off, right, in this prison. And so, he's being held against his will. And I think he keeps praying for these people to be saved, and they're not. And then Kichijiro keeps trampling and getting away.
And then he reappears and he asks for forgiveness. Yeah. And he asks to give confession to Rodriguez, which is funny and also really kind of moving at the same time.
But I think it really, speaks to just our humanity of we would suffer. If it's our choice to go through physical suffering, when people are I would die for my child or something like that. But if it was you watching your family suffer and you going against a belief that you have, wouldn't you say, fine, don't kill them? I really don't believe this. To save them. Yeah, that's the rub, because it's oh my gosh, I don't know.
It's a Sophie's Choice thing,
It's Sophie's Choice.
It is. No, it literally is. This movie is, it's one of the things I love about it. It doesn't give you solid answers. It asks a lot of questions. It is constantly asking you, the audience member, what would you do? The film is very confrontational that way. The way the camera is constantly on Rodriguez, it's a very immersive film. It makes these environments very vivid, very lived in, which is very discomforting because it doesn't feel like we're on glossy movie sets. It does feel like we are, we've time traveled.
Yeah, we're there, and it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah, and hence, the movie itself is also, as I said, it's grueling. It is a grueling experience. But more on that in a little bit. The final portion of this movie, which is remarkable, it shows how Rodriguez, played by Garfield, he's the only surviving of the two. Adam Driver has exited the movie at this point. His character has died in a horrible way. So Rodriguez, played by Garfield, is now basically the mentor, being mentored rather by Ferreira, played by Liam Neeson, and we see the joyless life they have to live, where they have to look through artifacts and determine whether they are Christian or not Christian. They are, basically these two freaks, these two white former priests who they're prisoners, but they're also there as an example. They have to do these annual, it's almost like a doctor's checkup, these annual declarations, how they no longer believe. So it's like
there's not just one time that you have to apostatize. You basically have to keep doing it.
This constant conditioning that they have to endure, and it's and it's heartbreaking. And I gotta say, the entire film, from his first scene to his last, Liam Neeson, I love that there are. He really makes you wonder just how deep into this his character is, whether he does have any faith left in him, whether his humanity has existed. Even from his first scene, there is something torturous about his existence. He is doing what he has to do. He is helping them turn this priest over to basically his way of life. But Neeson is not showing his hand completely. There are a lot of questions in that character, and I love that.
Yeah. And then there is a scene where they say to Rodriguez, hey, some good news, someone has died, and here's your new name and your wife and your child. And so he goes to...
Like Ferreira, he basically becomes like Ferreira.
Yeah,
completely.
So he gets to go live in a regular house at this point.
But he still has those checkups where he has to trample on the image of Christ and continue to...
Yeah. And Kichijiro makes another...
Yet another
he shows
appearance.
Up again, and he wants to still confess to him,
right? Which is amazing.
Yeah, and he's like, I don't do that anymore. And
Rodriguez says it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But talk about the voiceover at this point.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting because almost the entire film is Andrew Garfield's character, Rodriguez. We hear his voice, his narration. And it's very much like a Terrence Malick film where we're hearing prayers to God. It's a lot of his narration. It's letters to Portugal, and it's also prayers. And sometimes we hear him praying to God. Sometimes we hear him just giving updates on how the mission is going. But the last part of this movie, roughly the last 20 minutes, it's narrated from a character we have not met before. It's an outsider who is visiting, and he's basically looking at these apostatized priests the way you would a tourist attraction, and he's commenting on them, and he's fascinated with them, and he's reporting to an unknown person receiving the letter just how odd and strange it is, these things that he's witnessing and the things that he's heard. And it's we see the character, but he's not important to the film. He's kind of a neither here nor there side character, but it's fascinating to suddenly have a completely different perspective. And he's seeing everything that the Japanese leaders in this case want him to see, which is that these two men are fallen Catholic priests. They no longer have faith. They are now under our control. This is what they do. So it's like we're basically absorbing them like the propaganda that they are.
Yeah, we're very removed now from the inner life of Rodriguez.
Right, until we get to the final part of the film. Two key scenes. One where Ferreira is looking through these different artifacts and determining whether they're Christian or not. The Christian things get tossed, the non-Christian things are allowed into Japanese society. And he makes this offhanded comment, this unguarded comment, where he basically, words something in a way that suggests that his humanity and his faith might be intact somehow. And he exits saying, I doubt it, because Rodriguez calls him on it, and he walks away.
He says, something about you still pray to our God.
Yes, and he says, I doubt it, and he walks off, and it's a really great exit and a really wonderfully done moment. And then the final portion of the film, where we see how Rodriguez has led a very long life under this, this agonizing existence as a man who is constantly demonstrating that he no longer believes in God, no longer talks about God, no longer has any imagery of Christ on him at any time, has resisted all that. He's now a family man, and he dies, is given a Buddhist funeral.
Yeah, burial.
And
where they basically put him inside of a like a tube
bucket. Yeah.
And he's like, so yeah, he's just like sitting in there.
Yeah, forgive me, I'm not familiar with this custom.
Sorry.
Forgive me.
He's basically like sitting inside instead of laying flat like in a casket. You're sitting with like your knees up.
Yes.
And, you know, just like kind of hunched over.
Yeah, positioned upward. Yes.
Yeah. So that's where he is. And then his wife goes to
prepare the body for the last time. And
well, she tucks a piece of paper. I don't know what it is, but she tucks a piece of paper inside, and then they close it up, and they basically take it to a platform and set it on fire.
Yes. And as the narrator, this is a character who's like very small, but suddenly his perspective on it, as limited as it is keeping us into, you know, the groove of the film. We're seeing now the film through his eyes. But the film gives us this remarkable, impossible close-up. Impossible because, you know, obviously it's a special effect. There's no way it could have been done otherwise. But the containing unit where Rodriguez is inside of it, it's burning, it's set on fire. The camera goes in for a painful close-up. It goes through the flames into the coffin essentially, and we see that very, very, very deep into the coffin, clutched in Rodriguez's hand, is this tiny little crucifix. Mm-hmm. This visual indication. And it's, you know, again, there's a lot of ways to take that. I mean, who's to say if it's even really there? Maybe Scorsese is just suggesting it. But anyway, this is the moment that is apparently not in the novel. But I believe, I mean, it signals that, you know, even though outwardly he never was allowed to express it or discuss it again, but inwardly Rodriguez never lost his Christianity, he never lost his faith, and never lost his love for Christ. And I even would go as far as to say that I think his wife put it there, because I think the movie makes an interesting suggestion that perhaps he was able to share his faith with his wife and his child obviously in a very secretive way. Mm.
Yeah, and I got really excited about that because
remember the wife. I mean, like the way, you know, she's photographed in a lot of interesting ways in that final scene. I think that suggests, you know, that there's a lot more to her than she's allowed to show.
Right.
There's some very some deliberate close-ups, and even like her last shot where we're seeing her from a side view as she's watching the coffin being taken away. I do think that interpretation is valid.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, anybody like that kind of thing, I'm like, ooh, so he did like go against the government and he did have this secret life, and which I think is every human's right, just in general, to believe what you want to believe. But I love that because it's almost like, you know, don't let the bastards get you down. Like you keep your faith. You keep believing what you know is right in your heart, and it looks like that's what he did, which, you know.
You could say, you know, if we look at it from that perspective, Rodriguez, he did both things. He practiced what he preached. He initially was somebody who said, no, just deny your faith, do the trample thing so the Inquisitor and his awful guards aren't going to kill you. But for the rest of his life, after he was captured and you know, apostatized, you know, suddenly he is, for the rest of his life, living his own form of physical torture, except it's psychological.
Yeah.
You know, he's becoming like those that he watched suffer and die in front of him, except for him, it's this daily death of his identity being stripped away layer by layer by layer by layer. But on the inside, even though he died physically and he'd certainly died, you know, you could say psychologically, he managed to maintain his faith, and it's still there, it's still intact, tucked away in his palm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that's how the film ends. The movie opens and begins with this really great audio cue of the outside ambient noises rising and falling very quickly as a way to bookend the film. Mm-hmm. Andrew Garfield's performance in this thing is really rarely commented on. I hate that most people know him as a former Spider-Man, which I think is ridiculous. He did this movie and Hacksaw Ridge back to back. God bless that guy. I mean, those are two very physically and psychologically demanding roles for any actor. He goes very raw in this movie.
Yeah, he you know, he has his shirt off a couple times, and I'm like, oh, he almost went full Christian Bale for this.
He and Adam Driver are emaciated in this film. They're
emaciated.
I don't know what they clearly no craft services table during the making of this food because these guys are not eating anything.
No,
they look like
they do look. It looks very realistic.
Yes, it's a it's not one of these movies where an actor takes off their shirt and you go, oh, Gold's Gym, very nice. No, this is like it's very not to talk about the movie in a kind of a dumb, superficial way, but like the authenticity extends to the performances. As I said, I do.
Except the hair. The hair was always on point, and
pretty grungy though. I mean, I don't think he had great hair. I mean, as I said, like towards the end of the film, I mean, he becomes very Christ-like in his appearance, and it's pretty. I mean, unless you like the hair of the '70s, I didn't.
I don't know. I would like to hear from anyone else who noticed his hair because I was like,
you really thought it looked well kept?
Yes.
When he had it in a ponytail, sure, but
when it was like down, it had like perfect waves.
When he'd wake up in his cell and he looked like Manson, really?
I don't know.
Really?
I just felt like it wasn't realistic. Like the hair person was like, "Here, let me do you a favor."
You're Andrew Garfield. Let's make you look good. You've suffered enough.
Yes.
Wow, the one thing we disagree about the hair.
Yeah, but as far as like not eating, it looks like he hasn't. I don't think he was on the apple a day diet like Christian Bale, but it was pretty close.
Oh, all right. Well, in any case, I do think this is a high point for him. I mean, this is an actor who's he's worked with David Fincher. His first film was The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, which was this great Terry Gilliam film. I mean, I love the choices that he's making. So I for those of you who only know him as Peter Parker, please see this film. He's
The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus. That's a crazy, weird, but good movie.
It's a great film, and he's great in it. And it's interesting because his role is actually the lead character, but because he was an unknown when he made that film, we tend to talk about Heath Ledger and Christopher Plummer and everybody else. But yeah, he's actually the star of that film.
Yeah, crazy. I didn't remember that till you said that.
Yeah, and it's wild too. If you watch the movie, it's like he's actually the star of this, but because nobody knew who this guy was and he was the least famous person in the cast, it kind of drifts from the mind. But yeah, that film holds up really well, and his performance in that is very good. Yeah,
I was impressed with him in this movie. I thought he did a really great job.
And for the record, I thought he was a good Spider-Man, but and I get it, okay? I mean, like, I don't want anything bad to happen to him, but, when we one day lose Robert Downey Jr., what are they going to say? Robert Downey Jr., former Iron Man, they're not going to talk about Chaplin or,
you are... No.
I'm just making a point. Like, when we lost Sean Connery, what did we say? The former 007. This guy did almost 100 films, amazing performances, and all we can talk about is,
true.
and obviously I'm a huge James Bond fan, that, but like it does sometimes, like, again, I don't want to live in a world without Harrison Ford, but when he passes away, it's going to be Han Solo is gone.
Yeah, you're right.
And I that drives me crazy when it's an actor that accomplished and that prolific a career, and it's like,
so we need more like Andrew Garfield groupies then. Is that what you're saying?
I'd say so.
Okay.
Yeah, certainly advocate for his work. And I love that people saw Hacksaw Ridge because that was a very good film, and I think the fact that it was directed by Mel Gibson kind of made people like, I don't know if I'm going to see a Mel Gibson film, but he was great in that film, and that movie was actually widely received. That did not happen to Silence. As I told you, I saw it at this film festival at the end of the year. It opened up a couple weeks later in January, I think, of 2017. And I remember bumping into my buddy who is manager of the movie theater I was at, and he saw me in the lobby. He's like, "Hey, do you want to go see Silence? It's playing." I'm like, No, I've already seen it. He's like, "You sure? There's nobody in there." And I said, "Craig, it's opening night. It's 7:00. He's like, "Yeah, man. Like, do you want to peek your head in? There's nobody in there." Heartbreaking. In this big auditorium. I mean, I do think this is a movie that should be seen on the big screen because that's how I got to see it. But
a 3-hour Scorsese movie is a tough sell.
It's a hard sell, especially a movie like this, obviously, because I mean, if you're going to compare it to another Scorsese film, it's clearly, I mean, it's like The Last Temptation of Christ, which he also directed. It's very much like that. It's a serious exploration of faith. It is not a movie it's not a feel-good film. You know, it's certainly not, you know, what you would call the Bible Belt faith-based movie where everyone at the film is saved and holding hands and
having a kumbaya moment.
And Michael Curtis Chapman plays over the end credits.
How dare you? It's Stephen Curtis Chapman.
I don't care. Anyway, I stopped caring about that guy a long time ago. Sorry. With apologies to Stephen Curtis Chapman. Okay. But you see my point. Like, this is a film that deals with Christianity and religion and the idea of being a missionary in a very profound and confrontational, really intelligent way. And nobody went to see it in theaters.
Yeah, I know. It is going to be one of those films that I think you and I will probably continue to talk about over, I don't know, the years, I guess. Just because I think our opinions will probably change about all the characters probably multiple times.
I suspect you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, because it is so, it's not black and white.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a humanity to these characters that's very, very raw and very real. And you know, and as much as we'd love to say that in life, you know, well, you know, this person is a hero and this person is a villain, it tends to never be that easy and that simple. Everybody has a backstory. Everybody has, you know, their secrets. Everybody has their contradictions. And there's a lot of that in this film. And we're dealing with people that are forced to make a declaration of faith or die. You know, and it's like, how would any of us react in this impossible situation? You know, and what is the right thing to do? And the film struggles with that. The characters struggle with that. And I admire that. I admire that this film doesn't go easy on its audience, and it doesn't allow the audience an easy out. And I suspect people listening to this are going, well, why would you watch this film? and look, I get it. It's a challenging film. It's designed that way, in the same way The Last Temptation of Christ was, in the same way the other religious film that Scorsese made, the film Kundun about the Dalai Lama. These are movies that are just, you know, it's very much take it or leave it. It's, you know, it's like either you're in it or you're in the way. You know, it thrusts you into this scenario, it thrusts you into this world, this logic, these belief systems, and if you're not comfortable with it, the film is going to be a challenge. But the thing is, it's a challenge for people who believe or don't believe. It's a tough film, but I think like a lot of great art, and certainly like Scorsese's greatest art, it speaks honestly about what it's about, and it's doing what we're doing right now. I can't say the value of this conversation, but like after you and I watched the movie, I mean, we had a long conversation about this movie, and it's that kind of a film. And I think the best movies are like that. They're worth talking about. They're worth, you know, picking everything apart. And the fact that it is based in truth, the fact that it's also a movie that, you know, speaks to universal feelings, thoughts, and frustrations and fears about religion and faith, I think it's valuable, and I will say I do think it is Martin Scorsese's best film.
You heard it straight from the critic.
10 years ago, I taught a class on his films and his life. There have been many great books written about Mr. Scorsese, and 10 years ago, because the class was from his first movie all the way to Shutter Island, because that was the most recent thing he had done. And I've seen all of his movies many times. His work means so much to me. The versatility of it. It's not just this guy who makes mob movies. This is the guy who did Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore and Cape Fear and The King of Comedy and After Hours and The Age of Innocence. There's so, to look at everything he's done, he's made just about every kind of movie you can think of. Mm-hmm. And I love that at this point in his career, when he has nothing to prove anymore, he makes a film like this. I do think, not only is it unlike anything he's done before, I think scene for scene, I think it's a masterpiece. I do think it's his best film, which is why everybody needs to see it, even if it's not an easy sit.
Yeah. See it with somebody you like to have a good conversation with, because I think that's the most valuable takeaway.
Yeah, fun fact, not a date movie.
Not a first date movie.
Yes. Yeah.
If you've been dating somebody for a while, then
if you've been married to him and you're married to a film critic, it can go very well.
There you go. Yeah. Okay, so would you change the ending?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't change a frame of this movie. No, I feel like it's blasphemy to even make a joke about that. Okay. Oh, you got one?
Yeah, here's what I would do. Okay. So Ferreira and Rodriguez are sitting in the temple, mm-hmm. you know, the Buddhist temple, and Rodriguez is finding out for the first time, like, what's happened to Ferrera, and he's just horrified. And then all of a sudden, they pull out
this could go anyway.
their samurai swords.
Okay.
And they save themselves, and then they head back to Portugal, where they can live free and do what they want.
Oh, man. Total happy ending. Wow.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even take it that far. I would be like, I would have at one point when, their Japanese guards are looking the other way, I would have Liam Neeson like lean over to Andrew Garfield and be like, "Praise Jesus," and they do like a little fist bump, and that's the one moment. I would give them that. But
so you would like them to have more of a definitive like
let's just do this. We've lost. Yeah, let's just get through this. Don't worry. Like at one point in time we're going to be in heaven. We will be free of this. So it's like it's cool, man.
But they just leave it so
we're
ambiguous.
The secret faith club.
The secret faith club. Okay. Yeah.
To talk about this movie in such a dumb way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, because I was thinking like, why don't they just like go home?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, like, obviously, not only because they're played by these movie stars, but because of what these characters truly have suffered through. Obviously, it would be great if a cavalry of some sort showed up, freedom. Yeah, but that's not what this is about. This is about suffering.
Yeah, it is about suffering.
Yeah.
Okay, well.
But it's a good film, folks. Don't let it scare you. You're like, suffering, 3 hours? I don't know. Oh, but it's Scorsese. It's brilliant. See it, you cowards. I'll say last thing, like this movie opened up the same weekend as a movie called Monster Trucks. It's a movie about a truck literally made out of a freaking monster. And that movie opened better. It had made more money. That movie was sold out the same weekend as Silence. It sickens me.
Sometimes I'm just offended by our generation.
I mean, look, I'm guilty of that too, okay? I mean, when I was a kid, there were a series of movies called Police Academy, and I'm one of the reasons there's 7 of those awful movies. So, I'm part of the problem too. Come on, I gotta be.
We all like our guilty pleasures.
We all like our stupid
junk
movies.
Food.
But I hate it when the junk food just, makes us, completely miss the 4-course banquet that an artist like Scorsese has given us. I'm like, no, man, Monster Trucks, that looks really good. Can I have 3 for Monster Trucks?
Oh, wow. Okay. On that note, when you are looking to Netflix and chill, we hope you pick a really, really good movie in the middle of all the junk.
Yeah, and Scorsese, most of his movies are on Netflix, and I think that started with The Irishman. They're just like, let's just let's go heavy on the Scorsese films. I recommend not only this film, I recommend Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which is one of the greatest women's dramas I think ever. When people talk about chick flicks, I'm like, that's the one. Ellen Burstyn, it's one of the best. He did a film called The King of Comedy with De Niro and Jerry Lewis, which is a brilliant film. Cape Fear, one of the greatest remakes of all time. It's a terrifying film. It's an excellent film. After Hours, one of the great comedies of the 80s. It's a dark comedy, but boy, is it funny, and it's wonderful and inventive. The Age of Innocence came out in 1993. It's a costume drama. It looks and feels like a Merchant Ivory film, but it's better than every Merchant Ivory movie you've ever seen. It's Daniel Day-Lewis, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Winona Ryder. It's excellent. Shutter Island is underrated. The Departed is a little overrated, and you know what? I would say the same thing of Goodfellas. Goodfellas is a great movie, but I think Casino is even better. I love Casino. I recently wrote about it. Yeah, Scorsese. So look into the Scorsese films.
We should post in our show notes the order of like your top Scorsese films.
I'd be happy to give my top 10 Scorsese films. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so that people can, have a little Scorsese binge.
Yeah, I hope so. Because I know that Mean Streets and Goodfellas are great films. They are. But I think there's too much emphasis on the gangster films, too much emphasis on the movies that are Scorsese, when really to be a Scorsese movie just means that it's about characters who are unreliable, who are struggling, who are contradictory. They don't always make the right decisions, and they suffer for their sins. And The Aviator is another example. I mean, there's
Wow, you just like summarized every Scorsese film.
Yeah, well, but I mean, it's a consistent. That's what makes him an auteur. It's not even his visual style, because it changes from movie to movie. And he does have those signature shots, but really it's about character with him, about storytelling, and that's why he's one of the greatest. So I hope people will, not only seek out this, but all of his films, and just go to IMDb, look at the list, and pick out the one you haven't seen before. And chances are it's terrific. Only one bad movie. He made a movie in 1977. It's called New York, New York. It's a musical. De Niro, Liza Minnelli. It's terrible. Not to get personal, but Scorsese even admitted that he had a bit of a substance problem at the time. It shows that movie is aimless and it's bad. It's the only bad Scorsese movie. Otherwise,
do not pick that one.
No, but he did Raging Bull right after. So it's like this guy just has a stack of masterpieces, and I think Silence is at the top of that stack.
All right. Thanks, babe. Good talk.
Sorry, I was jabbering about that. Did you like this film? I mean, would you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because I know it's easy to admire, but yeah.
No, I did like it. I'm glad I saw it. I don't know that I would seek it out to watch it again, but I would definitely, if anybody else saw it and wanted to talk about it, I'd be totally down for that. So I think that's the value of some of these films, is watching them and then being able to talk about the different themes with other people. And I think it really helps you get to know people on a deeper level, because you're talking about, you're not just like, so do you have faith? It's, you can talk about these things and have a movie to kind of help you get into a conversation and really get to know people and what they think about all the themes that they bring up, because I thought it was great.
You and I grew up in Christian environments, went to private Christian schools, and I've known a lot of people who've gone on mission trips to different countries, some of which were really dangerous countries to go to. I would love to hear their take on this film, their thoughts on the film. Yeah,
I would love to hear a missionary talk about this movie. That would be very insightful and interesting. I mean, I've never personally done that kind of missionary work or anything. Yeah. But, there are people that do, and I'd be very curious how they felt watching it.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think the conversations this movie inspires are very worthwhile, which is why it's as good as it is.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining a more serious episode of So I Married a Film Critic.
Yeah, we'll go back to the Amanda Bynes teen comedies. So hang in there.
No, we won't.
Thank you.